I have not forgotten that people like to hear how terrible things are. That, as Abba Eben said, Jews like their clouds without silver linings. And I remember the last time I quoted that, it's when we took a trip to Israel in January with federations, with JF&A, and we had the opportunity to have an audience with the President of Israel. And each of us went around, and when it was my turn, I said whatever I said, and then I said, as Abba Eben said, Jews like their clouds without silver linings. And President Herzog said, you know, I never heard that, even though he was my uncle. And I thought, oh no, did I just quote your uncle to you? And it reminded me how small Israel actually is, and actually the story that it brought to mind was the wonderful story that Amos Oz tells in Tale of Love and Darkness, which is really his autobiography in a beautiful book. And he says he remembers how excited he was when he was a child and they issued the new Bialik 5-pound note. They put the national poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik, on the money, which is something that Israel would do. And he managed to get this, and he was excited, and he ran home, and he showed it to his father, and then he showed it to his uncle, and his uncle grabbed it from him. And he said, what are you doing? That's mine. His uncle said, Bialik owed me 5 pounds. We're a small people. And yet, one of the things that I realized recently when I was preparing and then gave a lecture about the history and causes of anti-Semitism in New York was something that actually had never struck me before, but seems very clear right now, was among all the other reasons for anti-Semitism is the fact that we are small enough to be able to persecute and big enough or powerful enough or influential enough to be worth persecuting. We hit the persecution sweet spot. Because if we were much, much, much bigger, people would not persecute us. And if we were of no consequence and no influence, people would not persecute us. And I never really thought about it that way, but the more I look around and think about it, the more I realize it is true. That's why you get these conspiracy theories that we run the world, because we're too small to obviously run the world. But you can see people in different spheres of influence, and so you can extrapolate fraudulently that we do. One of the ways that you see this in my own experience, especially in the past year, is by everybody saying, look at how all the Jewish billionaire donors are trying to control higher education. They're all taking their money away because they don't like what the places are doing, which, by the way, is what a donor does. It has nothing to do with their religion. I know, as somebody who ran an organization, when donors like what you're doing, they give money, and when they don't like what you're doing, they tend not to. But apart from that, here to me is the really interesting part, and this is brought home by this morning's Torah portion. As Ambassador Oren mentioned a minute ago, all these people gave gifts to the Mishkan. Now, if you think about it, what makes that most extraordinary was not 10 minutes ago, but let's say a year ago, these people were slaves. They had nothing, nothing. Suddenly, they were able to enrich themselves in leaving Egypt, and what people who had nothing and then have something generally do not do is give the something away. It's unbelievable that these donations were given by former slaves. You would expect the reaction to be, I'm going to keep mine till we get to Israel, if you don't mind, right? I don't need to give it to the Mishkan. God will be fine. and I'll keep it. But no, in fact, the donations came in thick and fast, so much so that in the end, as you know, Moshe had to finally say that which no other Jewish leader has ever said, which is, stop giving already. And that's the same reality that nobody is pointing out about all these donors that are pulling their money. If you look at their parents, their grandparents, they had nothing. These are not dynasties of wealth. These are the grandsons of peddlers. And yet, they've given millions and millions and millions of dollars away to education in this country. And that's not what anybody's focusing on. What they're focusing on is, oh, look, as soon as they don't like, but what about the fact that they gave the money in the first place? Which is extraordinary. Because I don't know if you know this, but if I said to all of you, tell me whose great-great-grandfather was wealthy, I don't think anybody in this congregation would leap to their feet. Maybe one. And yet, that's the reality of all the people that we're talking about now, as though they are using their money as weaponry as opposed to as a source of creating values. Because as you know, the value battle is the battle we're fighting. Yes, we are fighting a battle about anti-Semitism. And when I walked through the square at Harvard that had the hostage posters and saw them covered with red paint, I knew we were fighting a battle about anti-Semitism. But the deeper value is about values the deeper battle is about values in general. It is about whether you believe in the decency, the goodness, the kindness of each individual human being to be judged as an individual, whether you believe that different points of view ought to be expressed in the public square and in universities, and whether you believe that people should be judged not by the group they are a part of, but by their thoughts, their expressions, their actions, and their legacy. And anti-Semitism is a piece of that battle, but it is not all of it. And what I want to say to you is there are silver linings here. Because when people say to me, for example, well, do you feel safe at Harvard? Yes, perfectly so. Because it might surprise you, but when I walk around Harvard, I am not the only one with a kippah. And I am certainly not the only one who strongly identifies as a Jew and a Zionist. And that's true at all these campuses, even though in some places it's better, in some places it's less good. But we should not despair of the fact both that there are a lot of young, serious, committed, strong, outspoken Jews out there, but also that we are not alone. There are a lot of young, strong, committed people with values out there too, who stand with us and who have been awakened to the reality that there is a civilizational battle going on. When people at an Ivy League university celebrate the Houthis, whose flag, as you may know, reads, and I am not making this up, God is great, death to America, death to Israel, death to the Jews, and they're celebrating them when they know that the last thing on earth they would want is to live in a place controlled by the Houthis, and the last thing they should want for other human beings is that they should live in such a place. you recognize that the value battle is the real battle, the deep battle. And the silver lining is that a lot of people are waking up to that reality. I am sure that the Israelites in the desert had to wonder, really, do we have anything to give? But then they discovered, you know what, we have a lot to give. And I think that there are a lot of kids on campus and elsewhere who didn't realize how much they had to give, and now they realize they have a lot to give, and a lot to say, and a lot to do. And I see them and hear from them, and from their parents and their grandparents, yes, it is true that we have a generation of Jews, some of whom do not really understand what being Jewish has meant for thousands of years. They have been born into a different world than the world their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents knew. And they're having a hard time adjusting to the realities of what this world is. But you know what? That's why it is the job of older people to engage them in dialogue, to both listen to them and to teach them. One of the many value battles that we are currently engaged in is the reassertion of the right of people who know more to teach people who know less. Unfortunately, one of the things that we see throughout America and certainly throughout education is that the teachers are afraid of the students. I think one of the reasons for this, by the way, is that this is the first generation in history that has essential life skills that their parents didn't have. No kid told their parents how to grow crops. They didn't know. But they can tell them how to work the computer. They can tell them how to get on TikTok if, God forbid, their parents should want to be on it. And because they have skills that their parents don't, I think parents have lost some of the recognition that they have wisdom that their children don't. And just as much as we have to recenter the children, we have to re-energize the parents and the teachers to recognize that we actually know things that they don't know, and that we have something to teach that they need to learn. That's okay. So now, I was just at a conference in Orlando, B'nai B'rith Youth Organization. There were over 4,000 teens there, and they had a 500 teen waiting list. It would do your heart good to just look out over these teens and see them all there. It was fantastic. So one of the panels I'm on, you know, they have 4 people on the panel, and they asked, what gives you hope? And of course, all of us want to say, seeing thousands of teens, you know, being here and celebrating Jewish life and celebrating Israel and being together, that gives us hope. But of course, that was taken by the first person on the panel. So then they asked the second and the third, and finally they got to me, and I was the last person on the panel to answer. And the moderator said, so, Rabbi, what gives you hope? And this is what I said. What gives me hope is I imagine myself in a conversation with my great-great-great-grandfather. And I say to him, it's terrible what I'm seeing at Harvard. And he says, you're at Harvard? And I say, yes, but there's a lot of anti-Israel sentiment there. And he goes, there's an Israel? And I say, yeah, but you should hear the administration is talking about shaving some of the billions of dollars of aid. And he goes, and America gives it billions of dollars of aid? And I say, you know what? You're right. We have problems, but great-great-great-grandparents we are very, very blessed. Shabbat Shalom.